Okay, so here's another thing that makes absolutely no sense. Yesterday we talked about Nintendo and their contradictory behavior, how they take so much strong action against emulators, yet they themselves don't do anything to preserve their classic games. Well, here we have another case of hypocrisy, where Warner Brothers has decided that they're going to be doubling down on live services and free to play games after the failure of Suicide Squad. That's right. Yes, Suicide Squad is a live service game. You need an active internet connection in order to play the game, and you cannot play it offline. They say they're going to bring offline support in at some point, but as of right now, it's online only, and has tons of microtransactions and battle passes and all that kind of thing. So that's why it's interesting how Warner Brothers Discovery executive J.B. Perrette has framed Suicide Squad as more of a standard big budget release that is a premium experience, just like Hogwarts Legacy. And because Hogwarts Legacy did so well, it was one of the best-selling games in the history of Warner Brothers Discovery as far as their video game division is concerned. But Suicide Squad was disappointing, and it proves that these big budget games, it's so volatile and it's too risky to make games like that. Therefore, they need to double down on live services and free-to-play titles. That's literally what Warner Brothers said in their recent conference call. Insane, right? Because no one in their right mind would compare Suicide Squad to Hogwarts Legacy. They are completely different games. And one is obviously much higher quality than the other. And one is entirely single player and does not have a whole bunch of microtransactions, does not require a constant internet connection, and does not feel like overpriced trash. But that's actually what Warner Brothers thinks, is that Suicide Squad and Hogwarts Legacy are the same type of game, that someone who loved Hogwarts Legacy should obviously love Suicide Squad as well. And because they didn't, now they need to focus entirely on live service and kind of veer away from the single-player experience. Although Suicide Squad is technically single-player, you can play it solo with bots, it's obviously meant to be an online co-op experience, but it costs $70. Would the game be more successful if it was free to play? Possibly, but that's not a surefire bet either. There are plenty of free-to-play games that crashed and burned pretty quickly. Just because it's free to play doesn't mean it's going to be successful or it's going to fail. I think really it just depends on how engaging the game actually is. Because remember, there was a game years ago in 2016 called Battleborn, and that started off as a full-priced game, then eventually transitioned to free-to-play, but that didn't do anything to save the game. Nobody cared still because the game just wasn't interesting to the average consumer. And I know there are a lot of die-hard Battleborn fans that swear up and down that it's one of the most underrated games of all time. I tried it and I just couldn't get into it. I thought it was pretty boring, personally. What we're seeing is not the fall of the single-player game. Single-player games have been doing better the past 5 years than they had in years past. We saw a resurgence in single-player games. There's a reason why Sony pretty much doubled down on single-player, and that's all we got with their first-party games since the launch of the PS4, because it works. People don't always want to play online and have microtransactions shoved in their face every 5 seconds. They just don't want that. They just want to be able to chill, relax, experience the story, and that's the thing. Suicide Squad does not have an engaging story. Nobody cares. A game like that is just so void of charm and personality, it just feels empty. It's kind of like an Anthem. Great gameplay mechanics and all that, but the world feels so empty and there's no reason to feel engaged in it. There are a lot more stories in recent years of failures in the live service space than there are with single-player titles, because it's such a crowded space, and there are all these games that are trying to compete for your attention and for your commitment, because it is a huge commitment playing these live service games. They're a real grind a lot of the time, and you have to spend countless hours in order to really get the full experience. And in order for these games to be successful, you need to have a constant stream of revenue. You need to keep the players engaged. Compare that to a single-player game where they made the game, and you play it, and you beat it, and that's it. They don't rely on you constantly buying microtransactions in order to make money and be commercially viable. Offline single-player games don't have to spend a shit ton of money maintaining servers and that kind of thing. So live services are actually a bigger risk right now than a standard offline single-player game. When it comes to Suicide Squad's failure, I think it simply comes down to the fact that nobody in their right mind is going to pay $70 for that. They charge premium price, but you don't get a premium experience. Despite how much money they spent and how much resources they put into it, they didn't allocate those resources properly. Take a game like Helldivers 2, which had a fraction of the budget of a game like Suicide Squad and is doing so much better, making so much more money, and has a lot more people interested. Part of that is that they only charged $40 for the game instead of $70. If Helldivers 2 was $70, then I think the success of that game and the story surrounding Helldivers 2 right now in the gaming industry would be so much different. And same thing with Suicide Squad. If they maybe started off at 40 or 50, a lot more people would want to buy it, and it would actually do better in the long run. They're not making as much money from the individual game sale. You'll still have more people interested because not everyone's going to want to pay $70 for every single game. After a certain point, it becomes too much, and we've been getting so many great games lately that Suicide Squad needed to really do a lot and leave a huge impression to get a lot of people invested in that game, and they failed. It's just so frustrating after a while. It feels like every game now is trying to cash in on the live service trend and try to make as much revenue as they possibly can. And while there are plenty of good live service games, they are few and far between, and gaming was a lot better when it was viewed as a product rather than a service. We need more companies going away from the trend, not going towards it. I think gaming would be a lot better if the developers implement game mechanics in order to create the best piece of art that they possibly can, instead of now where it feels like they're implementing mechanics in order to get people to buy as many battle passes and microtransactions as they possibly can and just get as much revenue as possible instead of creating something that actually means something.